Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
Hi folks, and welcome back to Through a Scottish Prism. I hope yours are well. Been a heck of a week. We've had summits, we've had the news from Rome, we've had all sorts of stuff, and we've got lots to talk about. But before I get in, I just want to say, because next week we will be in Glasgow at the All Under One Banner March from Kelvin Grove to Glasgow Green, and we'll be there in the Green. So come over and say hello. We've got a few things there that you might be interested in. Talk to us. The people from Liberate Scotland will be there. The people from Indie for India will be there. Salvo, I think, will be next door to us. So it's, we'll all be there. So make sure you are. Time we get back on the street and send a wee message out to the people. Anyway, more on that later. But let me get everybody right away, and let's start there with, he's back. We paid the ransom. We've got him out. Here he is. Mr. Quinnan's back. How are you doing?
Hi, Ro. I'm doing well. It's nice to be back.
I hope you were kept in good conditions.
Yes.
Excellent. And up there in the City of Discovery, it's our Alan Petrie. Alan, how are you doing?
Hi, we're doing really good, Rory. Just getting ready for the Freeport's meeting up at Peterhead tomorrow between 1:30 and 3 o'clock.
There you go, folks. Make sure you're there if you're in the Peterhead area. Freeports, they're a big danger to Scotland. And up down there in Clickmannanshire, our favourite lawyer, it's our Eva.
Hi, Roddy. Yeah, had a busy week. Joined up with Alan on Wednesday, and we were in Brechin for the Yes Brechin anniversary event. That's available online with the Independence Live site, the live feed of it. So it was interesting, a gathering of people who all support independence, talking about the route map to independence. While there, I met a man called Lindsay McRae, who's behind this great project. It's called Project Arbroath, How We Take Back Our Independence. These booklets will be available next week all under one banner, and they're an interesting encapsulation of the route to independence with a brilliant bibliography in the back to direct you towards information such as the Macron report and Alf Baird's book, Scotland a Colony. So well worth a read. How We Take Back Our Independence, Project Arbroath.
Great, we'll have them next week, folks. Now, as we got one back, we've lost one. We knew where Lloyd was and why Lloyd wasn't here, but Mr. Boswell's failed to trap. Well, there's a shock. Perhaps he is feeling unwell this morning. I don't know, but we will look forward to getting him back. He may turn up somewhere during the programme, but if he doesn't, he'll be back soon enough. He's not been removed before any of you start asking. But just moving on, Alan, there was a bit of a week for our friends at Liberate Scotland. Made a statement and decided not to stand in the Hamilton by-election.
Yeah, I mean, at the very beginning, when we heard the by-election, we were all going with our hearts, thinking we've got to get a candidate in there. This is so important. This was Winnie's seat, so it's so important for us. But when you think about it using your head, what would it actually have got for the independence movement? Would it have made any difference in Holyrood? No. All we would be doing is changing the seat, changing the person sitting on the seat of the gravy train. That's not what Liberation Scotland's about. Liberation Scotland is about uniting this movement and organising a really good campaign for 2026 where we could make real changes, where we could put so many pro-independence candidates into Westminster, but they will not just be MSPs, they will be liberators. Because we're not just wanting people sitting on a seat in Holyrood. We want people who will take our country back. And standing in this by-election would have just cost us money, cost us shoe leather, doing a lot of work for really little return. So we are going to be concentrating on the 2026 election, trying to mobilise the whole movement. And one of the things that you said earlier on was the All Under One Banner March, getting people out to that. That's the important things at this present time. The by-election is just going to put somebody else on their gravy train, and we are not interested in filling that train. We want to free our nation, and that's 2026.
Indeed. But that was even, there is not as yet, because Liberate Scotland is a new organisation, there wasn't a core of anything in Lanarkshire that could be used. And if we were going to do it, it had to be done properly.
Well, there are supporters of Liberate Scotland right round the country, and the numbers are increasing every day. But when Liberate Scotland decides to run its first campaign, it'll be properly managed and it'll be appropriately funded and will throw absolutely everything at it. And we're not quite in that position yet. It's vital that when Liberate Scotland stands, we have an impact. And I'm determined, as everybody else here is, that that's exactly what will happen. We're not going to go into a campaign to fall flat on our face. We're going to make a mark, because the purpose of the exercise is to use the carrot, and if that doesn't work, to use the stick, to bring other independent supporting parties and independent supporters of no party together round the table, given that our joint exercise, our joint aim is the independence of our nation. And we can achieve that at the 2026 election, provided that we're professional, we're determined and we're united. And had we stood in Hamilton, that would have been perceived by some as disuniting and causing further fragmentation in a movement which actually should be beginning to heal from the divisions that were created by a certain former First Minister and prolonged by her successors. So we need to sit down together as independentistas and talk seriously about a strategy for next year, which is not any different from the Better Together strategy of 2014. This is becoming evident for various reasons that we'll touch on later, but it's vital that we and others that are like-minded are all literally singing from the same hymn sheet, which is how to maximise the independence vote and the independent supporting representatives in Holyrood next year. And us standing at Hamilton would not have achieved that result. As Alan said, we're not gravy trainers. We're here and we do what we do week in and week out, and all the work that goes on behind the scenes and the phone calls and the meetings that people in the main never really know about. We're doing that because we are determined to see our freedom come around sooner rather than later.
Indeed. And folks, if you want to, if you're serious about independence, Liberate Scotland, you know, whether that be with Indie for Indie, ISP, Liberation Salvo, join up somewhere and start, you know, putting your shoulder to the wheel, because it needs you all helping out. It needs everyone getting stuck in. So we'll be talking more about it. If you're down in Glasgow and you want to sign up, we'll be there, we'll get you, we'll point you in the right direction. Lloyd, I won't put you, because you were away for a couple of weeks, so we'll not put you in the spot with that one. But this week, you were aware, this week, John Swinney had his summit to stop Reform Scotland coming into Scotland and winning seats and votes. And we've got Liberal Unionist, Union, or nutcase, Unionist, Devolutionist, Unionist, and Ash Reagan. The summit, one I think misguided too, but it turned into a car crash.
I think it was always going to end up that way, Roddy. When I heard about this in the first place, I thought this is astonishing, because the original announcement was that this was to be the summit of how we were going to address the rise of the right in right politics in Scotland, and the focus of it was very clearly on the Reform Party. Now, the first rule of politics is never mention your enemy. Never mention the other side. Don't give them free publicity, and damn sure, don't gather together Civic Scotland in a room suggesting that they can find a way to defeat the democratic wishes of people who go out and vote, because effectively that's what this was about. You know, if people want to go and vote for Reform, that is their business. We are, you know, in a true democracy, you should not be in the business of telling people exactly how to vote or banning them from a particular vote. You have to challenge the politics of the vote that you don't like or the party that you don't like. But the cack-handed nature of this, the whole idea that they were going to draw people together who for 99% of the time find themselves fighting with each other, namely the Liberal Democrats, the SNP, the Labour Party, and so on. To go ahead and do this effectively gave Reform one of the biggest boosts that it's had in Scotland. It allowed the Tory defector councillor to have a demonstration outside. It really was extraordinarily cack-handed. Afterwards, the First Minister had effectively opened him up to questioning on a whole load of other questions, which made life very, very uncomfortable for him. Very uncomfortable. But then again, I look at that picture and I think to myself, right, okay, this was a meeting about addressing the issue of the rise of the right. And I had to chuckle at myself, because just for those that know it, I was a member of the parliamentary group under John Swinney. You can't get much more right-wing than John when things come right down to it. No, but let's be honest about this. What John's natural inclination is centre-right. So here we have, effectively, a meeting of the centre-right trying to outdo or defeat the ends of what they term the far right. But there isn't even a Conservative in the room. Now, apart from anything else, he gifted publicity to Reform. He gifted publicity to the Conservative Party. He opened himself to a set of questioning, which was frankly was quite embarrassing for him, and carried on for a couple of days afterwards with the robotic comments that were made about him that upset him terribly. Who is running his operation? Is this operation being run by children, or is it being run by the British? Because effectively, everything that they've done in the past week has been to the benefit of the British state and absolutely no benefit whatsoever to the Scottish people. Now, if you want to be, the language that John even used when describing this meeting was, I used my power as the First Minister to draw the country together. I'm sorry, John, this fantasy world, or this fantasy political bubble that you and your SNP cohorts are living in at the moment bears little or no resemblance to the world that the citizens of this country are living in. There is no great fear amongst the people of the rise of the right, because there is no rise of the right, John, except in the heads of those who live in the political bubble. And the rise of the right fears them, or gives them fear, for one reason and one reason only. Some of them are going to lose their salaries, right across all the parties, and that's what's driving this. The simple, straightforward fact of the matter is, if you're the leader of the Scottish National Party, the principal party of independence in this country, if you see a shift to the right, that's a shift to the right in Britain. And the only way to defeat a shift to the right in Britain is to get out of Britain, to become an independent country. That's what the purpose and function of the Scottish National Party is, and it should be for the Scottish National Party First Minister of this country when you see the rise of the right through Keir Starmer, before him Boris Johnson. If you see that happening, then the only answer is open the door and take us to liberation. Open the door and take us to the United Nations. Open the door and give people their freedom and their independence. Not sitting in a room in Glasgow with people who 9 times out of 10 you don't want to be talking to anyway. This was absolutely pathetic politics. It made us look foolish, and it also, unfortunately, gave a platform to Reform that probably boosted them as they were in the local council by-election. Foolish, childish politics.
Yep, we're going to come on to that election shortly. But the other thing, I put out a tweet saying, the fact that, the Reform is bad for the union because it stops the two-party job sharing scheme down in Westminster. And we should sit back, let them rip themselves apart, and when the union's weak, take advice from the Irish over the years. When the union's weak in England and squabbling, that's when we can make our move and be at our strongest. But Lloyd's right, Eva. The unionists turned it on him. I mean, why he didn't see it coming? Because earlier we'd had Sarwar saying that he was blaming the SNP for the rise of Reform in Scotland. So who's responsible down in England for the rise of Reform? It can't be the SNP. I mean, none of us here are great lovers of the SNP, but they can't be blamed for that. But earlier, just before there you go, but earlier, Annis had been willing to work with Reform to oust the SNP. They just can't get out their SNPs in their nut.
I think they're obsessed with the SNP, but unfortunately, we've got this terrible conundrum whereby folk like us think the SNP are not driving forwards the route to independence. They're not creating the route. They're not talking about the route. They're just talking about the end point, and that voting SNP will achieve that. Whereas Anna Sarwar and others say that the SNP are obsessed with independence. Well, it's actually the other way about. It's Anna Sarwar's obsession because there is no evidence that it's John Swinney's obsession. But to rewind a little, Lloyd, it was you, I think, who coined the phrase, the only reform Scotland needs is independence. Well, Alan lays claim to not my king. I lay claim to Scotland United will never be defeated. And when I read the mission statement that came out of John Swinney's meeting the other day, I just hang my head almost in shame and absolute desperation, because his panel that you saw, his top table that you saw in that photo that you put up there, Roddy, comprises a group of people who, with one notable principled exception, made Scotland a laughingstock in the context of gender recognition reform, their reaction to the decision of the Supreme Court. Were it not for Ash Regan, then you really would wonder about the sensibilities and the intelligence and the motivation of the people at that table vis-a-vis the women who comprise 51% of the population of Scotland. So that summit and that one photo did not bring together the people of Scotland by any stretch of the imagination. What it managed to do was to reinforce that the movers and the shakers, if I can be so bold as to refer to them as that, really managed to drive a coach and horses through any unity that there ever was within the people of Scotland, and certainly within the independence movement. But to make matters worse, the conclusions of the mission statement were that there are shared principles in public life and shared motivations and ambitions. And those are, wait for it, participation and openness. Hello, redacting pen, the sharing of power. Since when did anybody in John Swinney's cabinet actually share power with the people? They appoint, unelected quangos and fund charities to deal with niche issues and completely disregard the real life experiences, knowledge and understanding of masses of the population, whether it's in health, addictions, education, poverty, you name it. The third principle was accountability. Well, blankety blink. You all know exactly what I'm meaning, because what you've seen in the past few years is the opposite of accountability. No, quite apart from the conduct of the former First Minister, look at the conduct of one of those who was sitting at that top table, Lorna Slater. Lorna Deposit Return Scheme Slater. Where is the accountability for a woman who just days ago accepted that she knew that the deposit return scheme was guff and duff and that there was likely to be a huge fallout from it? She's cost us millions and will continue so to do. So there is the accountability as defined by that former SNP Green coalition. And fourthly, equal opportunity. For who? Define equality. They're still arguing about the definition of sex. So that was embarrassing in the extreme. And the way to roll back from that is for John Swinney to remember why he was elected and what the SNP allegedly stands for, and it's independence. So his next job, as he's been told time and time again, and as the people at Yes Brechin expected, and as the people that will be all under one banner next Saturday expect, is that he will convene a constitutional convention of those in Scotland who are in the majority, who desire independence for our nation, not another talking shop of people who do not have Scotland's best interests as their priority. The priority of everybody else at that table, with the exception of Ash Regan, was to prolong the union and to keep their noses in the trough and their feet firmly under the gold-encrusted tables of Westminster.
Here. We're going to come on to some accountability issues shortly. But Alan, this is the thing Eva alluded to. John Swinney is happy to sit down with Brits. He's happy to sit with the Brits, but he will not sit down with independentistas at a constitutional convention or even a chat with any of the other independence parties. It's quite telling, isn't it?
It is. I mean, to sit down a summit with unionists for the sole purpose of protecting England from themselves.
Yeah.
Scotland does not have a real problem with reform. Now, they are starting to make inroads. Why are they starting to make inroads? Because reform are able to blame problems of our nation onto minorities and the vulnerable of our nation. We, as a people, have to put those put the blame back onto those who are responsible, and that is the politicians. Asylum seekers do not make themselves asylum seekers. They become asylum seekers because we are paying for the bombs that are blowing up their countries and making them flee. We don't have the asylum seekers don't create housing problems. We create housing problems because our governments are refusing to invest in the housing sector and building properly affordable, rentable property. We have problems with the NHS, again, not because of asylum seekers, because of politicians. Politicians make the policies, it's not the people. And it certainly is not people who do not have a vote in this country. Reform, just like UKIP, just like the Brexit Party, just like the BNP, have this great knack of telling lies and blaming others who cannot defend themselves. Simply because telling lies is so much easier than telling the truth. But John Swinney should have had, if he wanted to really deal with the right wing, what he should have had was a constitutional convention on independence. Because only independence will free us from this right-wing lunacy. The right-wing lunacy is a problem of England. It is not the problem of Scotland. And it never has been. So we have got to unite the whole of this movement, push forward with our elected members, and make sure they are doing the job they were elected to do, to have a competent government. Because when you have a competent government, the right-wing lunatics are defeated. And with a competent government, we show people how very much different things could be in an independent Scotland. And that is where we have to be. Like Lloyd has said many times, the only reform that Scotland needs is independence.
Hear, hear. Hear, hear. And that's the thing, folks. Remember, Conservatives have not won a single election since 1955, and even that one's debatable. You can argue it because there were some Liberal Conservatives included in that victory. And it's a fact, though, reform are on the move. And as I said earlier, Lloyd, I think we should, John, any independent should sit back and go for it, have a bun fight, rip yourselves apart down in England. But the elections are showing, and I think it goes back to when the people wanted rid of the Tories and they jumped at Labour and they've been so disappointed they've dropped him. And now a lot of the people in England are looking at reform as the magic bullet, the saviour, the people to make a difference. We know they won't. But these are three elections that were by-elections that were held throughout the UK. And in each and every one of them, the one in Glenrothes, to start with that, the SNP held the seat. The Labour vote down, Tory vote down, reform there. They're all kicking about round about the same reform. Down in England, reform are the same, all round about 20%. This is classical for the union to be ripping itself apart. It's a time, as Napoleon said, to stand back and let your enemy make his mistake, Lloyd.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think what I find most interesting about the so-called rise of reform is it's primarily a product of the mainstream media. It's primarily a product of the BBC, ITV, and a few of the newspapers talking up the fear of reform. By talking up the fear, they've created an element of momentum for them. But what this really crystallizes for me is the massive, massive gulf between the social mores of the Scots and the social mores of England. The simple fact of the matter is that England has a problem with foreigners. And I include us in that. We're foreigners too. And as things get tight for England and the English, they lash out at other people, hence the ongoing hatred for immigrants. And this just shows that a complete intellectual vacuum at the centre of English politics. How they don't understand that by crossing half of the world, taking it over, robbing, plundering, and murdering the people, that 50, 60, 70 years later, that maybe those people from those very same countries might want to take back a little, so they come to the country that spent an awful lot of time telling them it was the greatest country in the world. And whenever those people want to come to that great country, namely England, they get told that they're not welcome. Now, you can't run an empire that way. That's not the way it works, as the French have found out. As the Germans found out, as the Italians found out. The simple fact of the matter is that until England addresses its own history, it genuinely addresses its own history, has a recognition that, in actual fact, the empire may not have been the greatest thing since sliced bread, as they've been born to believe. In actual fact, that it comes with a price. Mm-hmm. It's a yin and a yang here, isn't it? You spend 200-300 years stomping across the planet, taking command of the geography of other people's country and ordering them about, installing your own religion and your own education system, and telling them that what they had before was in actual fact terrible, and what England has given them now is progressive, forward thinking. It's the cultural peak of human achievement. You've kind of got to expect that the people, if you tell them that, then when their countries begin to fall apart because of the bombs raining down on them, or the man-made created famines, that those people are going to look to the great country that they've heard about, this wonderful place where the streets are paved with gold, and immediately head in that direction. And if you don't understand that, then you don't understand your own history. The lesson for us, though, is this. I never have had the sense that in Scotland we have a fear of those of a different colour, a different culture, a different religion, whatever. In some ways, it's not to paint a rose-tinted view of our country, but the fact is we've been a country of emigration and immigration for hundreds and hundreds of years, partly because we were part of that empire, but also for many other reasons. And I've never got the real sense in this country, that we have a problem with Johnny Foreigner. Whereas on the many years that I lived south of the border, and in many dealings with broadly the issue of English politics, there is a fear and a concern about Johnny Foreigner. There is a fear and concern about anyone who's not quite white. And I think that is an essential problem for England. And as a result of that essential problem for England, we have the rise of the likes of Reform and UKIP before that. We must not allow ourselves to be dragged into that debate when we are not part of that debate. The simple facts of the matter are, England has a problem, and it has a race problem. It's not to say that there is no racism in Scotland. There certainly is. And our greatest curse, without any shadow of a doubt, is the division, the sectarian religious division, that we fear to talk about, that we don't address centrally. That's the essential problem that we have in this country. It's not about people's colour. And until we recognise and stop allowing our middle classes to bleat about the fact that there may well be one racist or one homophobe in Scotland, therefore we're just the same as everybody else, we actually need to start addressing correctly how we interpret the behaviour of those that would govern us. Because, as we know very well, we are governed by England. Now, it's just an arithmetical fact that anything that is ultimately becomes the law in this country is because the majority of the members of Parliament who come from England wish it to be so. Now, we also then become dragged into their politics, the politics of division, the politics of racism. When in actual fact, these are not things that are normally expressed in our politics. They're not issues that have been big issues, which is why, when Alan said earlier, the rise of the likes of the BNP, UKIP, Brexit Party, whatever, they come as a blip on our politics, and then they disappear again. The National Front was never able to properly organise in Scotland because the people rejected them. The British National Party was never able to organise in Scotland properly because the people rejected them. We have to understand The differences between us and the others who live on this island are large and growing larger by the day. And that says to me, in a more clear way than anything else, it's time for us to cut the ties and float away. Let's dig a trench along the border. There's a good song.
And it would also create some jobs. Well, build a wall and they're going to pay for it. But the other thing you forgot to mention is that, I mean, they gave them cricket, Lloyd. I mean, their lives would never have been complete if they hadn't given them cricket. But the other thing, you're right, we don't have a problem because you go back, if you know your history, long before we were in the Union, we were fighting the 100 Years' War for the French against the English. We were doing business over in Belgium and in Holland and in the Baltic states, and in Polish university there was Scots. You actually see a lot of ginger Scots when you go to Poland. It's quite hysterical. And it's, after all these years, the gingers are there. So yes, you're right, we don't have that same problem. It's there, and to absolutely, encapsulate it, Eva, Nigel Farage has said if he becomes Prime Minister, there'll be a minister, they'll create a new ministry for deportations. Well, how does that sit with you?
That is going to be popular amongst various people.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I don't know if he means what he says, but he's certainly going to be attracting votes with that.
Sure.
The sadness from a Scottish perspective, though, is that we almost have in our DNA a sympathy for people who have had to flee or, been sent abroad or had to flee abroad for all the wrong reasons, because we're so familiar with that in our own national history. There is nobody who was ever born and brought up in Scotland that's without a relative that went abroad to either escape from some privation or simply to make their fortune. We've all got relatives in Australia, Canada, etc., and some of them are third, fourth generation, etc. And we understand what it's like to travel around the world, but it's enjoyable to travel around the world too. So it's not just about people that are fleeing war and famine, albeit that many of those wars the UK was an active participant in and continues so to be. But what I find really disgusting is that you've got John Swinney calling his summit to oppose the rise of reform. No doubt he'll have much to say about Nigel Farage's deportation minister. But while that's happening, at the same time, the SNP are trying to move a motion in Westminster to bring immigration powers to Scotland. And then, when they don't succeed in their motion, they're complaining about it. And the SNP news release said, Westminster has just voted to block Scotland from having control over migration policy. The Scottish Parliament's been calling for a migration policy which meets Scotland's needs, but Westminster said no. Need it be said and stressed once more, if Scotland were an independent country, England would have no control over our immigration policy whatsoever. That's the answer. And actually, the I word is the answer to every single question, every single comment that anybody in the leadership of the SNP or any of them elected at Westminster ever says. Now, I was really, in a way, entertained, but also gravely disappointed by a video that went out on Twitter on Friday from Dave Duggan, MP for, is it the Angus Glens and somewhere else? And what he said was he was heading back to Scotland after this vote that Labour in essence had blocked, and it wasn't fair and it wasn't right. And how you could maybe characterise his speech was he wasn't happy because Westminster didn't let the SNP speak. He had prepared a speech. Which he was not able to deliver because the big boys in Westminster didn't let him. That's more utterly pointless, posturing, hot air, waste of time. Westminster laughs at the SNP now, and might I suggest, in most respects, with just cause. Because they know perfectly well that the SNP currently are doing nothing whatsoever to bring to Scotland the powers that independence will bring us. They are not fighting for independence. They're jumping on the train or on the shuttle down to London cozying into Westminster for a few days at a time, living high on the hog. And the difficulty with these people elected for the SNP now is exactly what you saw in your first photo, Roddy, today of the top table at that summit. How many of those people, those MPs and those MSPs, are actually in touch with the people of Scotland and with reality? Because most of them at that top table you would describe as middle class. You would not refer to them in the main as people who either were or had been or currently are working class. That's beyond them. And it means that there are swathes of the population of Scotland who don't have the representation either in Holyrood or while we have to be there at Westminster that they deserve and that they need. And you have politicians dealing with meaningless motions like bring immigration powers to Scotland. It was never going to happen. It was just going to make another headline for the SNP to divert attention away from the fact that they're not dealing with the things that they ought to be dealing with. Principally education, and within Scotland, poverty and the economy. So look forward to, between now and May next year, if things remain as they are, press release after press release after press release from the SNP blaming Westminster for all the ills of Scotland and for Scotland being hobbled and why Scotland cannot proceed in the world as an economic miracle as opposed to the basket case that Westminster describes us as being. The reason for that is that we don't have politicians with a backbone, and that's what Scotland needs. Backbone and unity. And that will come when those in the SNP understand that their jobs are at risk if they don't come up with the goods this time. Immigration powers and the sham and the shame of Nigel Farage talking about appointing somebody to deport people. I've never heard so much guff in my life, but it will come to pass if Farage is in power in England, and the way to dodge him is for Scotland to go for independence. And as the Declaration of Arbroath says, and as the Arbroath booklet says, stop asking and create action to take it.
Correct. Liberate Scotland. Sign up, folks. On that, Alan, I mean, if actually, this is the crucial bit. They're gurning and grating in the headlines, but if you actually read it, Labour are accused of blocking a vote. Blocking a vote, not the powers, a vote. And if that had gone to the entire House, it goes back to what Lloyd said, how do you think those English MPs would have voted? Would they have voted to have given the colony of Scotland the right of immigration in case some of these brown chappies come across the border back into England? We would have lost the vote anyway.
England's not interested in what Scotland wants. But we all know that. And Labour are not interested in what Scotland wants. I mean, it is a Labour Party policy that they will never, ever vote for a motion brought in by the SNP. Mm-hmm. Now, the cold winter allowance that the Labour Party are now cutting for many pensioners, that fight started years and years and years ago. Gordon Wilson and Margaret Ewan used to move motions every single year to get a cold weather payment for Scotland, because it was a lot colder up here than what it is in England. And every single time, the Labour Party abstained. Many times it could have been won, but Labour Party abstained simply because it was an SNP motion. Run the country like that is unacceptable. You're supposed to run the country on behalf of the people. Now, Labour keeps saying, take you in a different direction. Well, sorry, that's not the direction I want to go into. But I mean, going back to Nigel Farage, he's got a cheek, because remember, right after Brexit, he applied for a German passport. His 2 children have German passports. His wife has a German passport. Yet he doesn't want anyone else coming into our country. He loves the expats abroad, because remember, they're not foreigners, they're expats. So, I mean, he's a bit of a hypocrite there. But the election, and especially the one in Fife, 24% turnout. And Reform got quite a high percentage out there. Not nearly winning, but quite a high percentage. And that shows how dangerous low turnouts are. Because at 24% of the turnout, you're talking of a councillor being elected on less than 5% of the eligible voters in the area. That's not democracy. And because the percentage is so low and the votes are so low, any right-wing lunatic could quite easily come up and take a seat. Not because the amount of people voting for them, but the amount of people staying at home and not caring. That is a dangerous game to play. The vote is one of the most important things that we have. Don't let the nutters get in because you cannot be bothered to go out and vote. Go out and vote. It is important. And that's the only power that we have against these idiots.
People should go out and vote, but they need to have an incentive to go out and vote. And the political parties nowadays are not giving them that incentive. That's half the problem. But on amendments, it's very true, Lloyd. During the Scotland Bill, I wish Phil was here, he'd have the exact number, but I think it was something like 108 amendments the SNP put forward to the Scotland Bill, the famous vow that we were to be given, and 108 were defeated. There was only one Labour, one Tory, one Liberal from Scotland, but the House voted them all down, every single amendment that could have made the Scotland Act any better than it was, and it was rubbish. So that's true. But I go back to the turnout. Do you think that the rise of reform is a problem, or are they a symptom of the actual problem, which is that the people, not just in Scotland, but throughout the Union, are totally cut off and fed up and sick of the political parties and the political setup we have?
Yes, I think that's exactly what's going on, Roddy. People feel disenfranchised. They don't feel disenfranchised. They feel like people don't listen to them. Let's not use the language of the political bubble. People don't believe that that the politicians hold them in any esteem. They don't believe that they're considered worthy in any kind of a way. And the further and further down, particularly the poverty ladder you are, the more and more likely you are not to vote and to feel even less valued than people that you're looking up to, because that's the nature of British society. And in some ways, British society, for want of a better description, is in actual fact just English society writ large and placed on top of Wales, Scotland, and the 6-county statelet in Northern Ireland. Now, Farage and Reform, the appeal to a particular element of right-wing political thinking in England, and you have to look at their leadership. Farage is a multi-millionaire, and as Alan has pointed out, takes full advantage of the fact that he's got dual citizenship and actually lives most of the time in either France or Germany, not in the United Kingdom. Richard Tice, the deputy leader of the party, is also a multi-millionaire asset stripper. That's primarily how he's made his money, is by destroying the livelihoods of other people and destroying companies across the country. His partner, Isabel Oakeshott, the former Gordonston girl, who wrote for The Telegraph, is known as a right-wing commentator who believes that we should open fire on the boats that are crossing the English Channel. She lives in Abu Dhabi. Richard Tice, deputy leader of Reform's partner and her children, lives in Abu Dhabi, but can be heard on a regular basis, daily basis, on the British right-wing media telling us about why immigration is a bad thing and why you shouldn't allow your culture to be diluted by bringing in immigrants from other places. Well, why is she living in Abu Dhabi? We should ask ourselves, or maybe we should ask her. This is the great con of the right-wing British parties, the ones that have had some influence. We talked earlier about the National Front and the British National Party. They never, ever really achieved what either UKIP, the Brexit Party, or what Reform are getting to, because they were working class. These are right-wing political organisations, not unlike Mosley's New Party, which will exploit the fears of the working class to the benefit of the rich. That's what it's always about. It's what it will be about this time. There's no question here that these people, in the same way as they use fear to create money in their businesses and in their industries, they understand the application of fear in politics and how they can exploit fear. Hence, Farage and his nonsensical concept of a deportations minister. None of this will come to pass. But what it does do is it excites that 17% of the population who are verging on being very unpleasant individuals. And always, the right wing in any country, but primarily in Britain, the extreme right wing knows that it's got a ceiling of around about 20%, a maximum of around about 20%. And that's post-Thatcher. They know that if they can get that on board, then what they do is they create a situation where they become the power brokers. And there's no question here that what's happening is that reform and whoever is behind reform, because, you know, they didn't come from nowhere. They're not on every single BBC broadcast. They're not on every local radio broadcast for nothing. And it's not that it's any form of conspiracy. It's the fact that what they represent, there are elements, particularly in the media in this country, and by that country I mean England and the United Kingdom, there are elements in our media who have those right-wing views because they come from exactly the same backgrounds as the Richard Tices and the Nigel Farages of this world and the Isabel Oakeshots. Again, what's at the root of this? You know, my great hobby horse, as I'm sure people may have noticed over the past couple of years, is the most divisive thing in this country is private education. Every single one of those people we've just discussed is a product of private education. If you look at the senior managers, the senior presenters, the senior reporters on the BBC, on Scottish television, on independent television, you will find that the vast majority of them are a product of the private school system. It's a divisive, vile and despicable division. It's forced upon the people and the children of this country from the earliest possible ages, and its byproduct is UKIP, Brexit Party, and now reform. Because what they do is, what they say to people is they create fear for the working class, but at the same time, they create a potential opportunity for the more vicious elements of the middle class right-wing politics. That's what we're getting from reform, but we're getting reform supported by the mainstream media because far too many people in the mainstream media have got a wee feeling that maybe there's something good about the concept of reform. And that is the most dangerous thing of it all, because we've just had 10 years where silence was forced upon people when people tried to effectively deny the realities of science. The division that has created is extraordinary, but it's primarily a division created by the middle class, for the middle class, against the middle class. And when it comes to this concept of reform, it's the same thing happening again. These people don't like to admit to the fact that they have some extremely unsavory, should we say, ideas about how things should be in this country. And as a result of that, they don't want to throw their hands up and say, yes, I'll vote for reform. But what they won't do is they won't ask them the hard questions. Why is it that Farage is never challenged by any BBC reporter to the fact that he spends most of his time living in a foreign country? Why is it that Richard Tice is never taken to task for the fact that he has built his millions by destroying the livelihoods of hundreds and hundreds of people across this country? Why is it that they never challenge Isabel Oakeshott for the fact that she has so many opinions about immigration, but the fact of the matter is she lives in somebody else's country? Because it suits them not to. And as you said earlier on, Roddy, I think, and this is, you know, ultimately what Britain gains from this is the division, the division amongst the working people and people staying at home and not voting, and the angry coming out to vote for reform. But then again, when any political party is getting 17% of the vote when the turnout has only been 24%, then they all need to be looking in the mirror and saying to themselves, what is it that we are not doing that people don't want to take part? Why is it they don't want to take part? Sorry, I'm going on now. It's what happens if I've not been on for a couple of weeks. I talk too much.
All that's stored up. No, all valid points. The same question almost to you, Eva, is reform a problem, or is it a problem, a symptom of the problem? Because I maintain we don't actually have democracy in the UK. We don't. And no Western has real democracy, or very few. I mean, we have what I would think is a feudalism democracy, if you like. It all starts with a king, an unelected head of state, an unelected second chamber, a first past the post unfair voting system, and it's the people that Lloyd alludes to, the same ones that are in Parliament from the public schools, they are running the Whitehall services. It is a feudal system that we live in, and most of us are at the bottom of that pile.
Of course it is, and it's primarily, at least in a Westminster context, the result of the first past the post electoral system. If there were proportional representation for Westminster, obviously the makeup of Parliament would be substantially different. But that's not in the interests of either of the two main or traditionally main parties of the last century or so to innovate on that at all, because it would have an impact that removed this constant yo-yoing that you normally see or we're used in our lifetimes to see between Labour and Tory. I don't think in the long term that reform will make an enormous impact on that, because it will probably end up that a lot of people go to reform and it ends up being a bit toned down when they fail to deliver on the various promises that Farage is currently making. But yeah, they are both a symptom and a problem, but they're a symptom because of exactly what we say, and Lloyd has just set out again so starkly, that politicians are out of touch with the people. The people don't get what they actually voted for. I mean, there isn't really anybody in the UK that seriously believed that Labour, as soon as they got into power, would actually proceed with austerity that was worse than that of the Tories. We didn't really think that they were as bad as that. We probably worried that they might be, but what they've delivered is an absolute pig's ear of practically everything that they've touched, and that disaster will continue. So at the moment, you've got a perfect storm for Farage, because folk have got the memory of how badly things went under the Tories. They're seeing things go badly under Labour and thinking, well, who else is there that might become the saviour charger that rides in to rescue us? So that in part explains the rise of reform. But, extremism and racism also explain the rise of reform, and jingoism and slogans. If you think back to the time of the Falklands War, we saw jingoism writ large. And between then and now, that kind of conduct has continued. So that what you had last year was young folk talking about, and I know because I had these conversations with some young people locally, they were voting reform because they wanted to stop the boats. And I thought, what boats are coming to Scotland? There are no boats coming to Scotland from abroad. People are not arriving in Scotland as their first port of call. Stop the boats is an English attitude, and it's akin to, obviously, what Lloyd was saying about Isabel Oakeshott's horrible conduct. And the unfortunate aspect of all of this is that this is the very point in time, for 1,000,001 reasons, why the independence campaign should be united and ramped up. We could not get a better time in history than now to proceed with that independence campaign. Prior to his death, Alex Salmond set that out very well, very eloquently, as was his wont, on innumerable occasions. And he said, the union is at its weakest. Westminster politicians are at their weakest. Labour were at their weakest. The Tories had already been weakened. These people are all, or were, on the way down at a point in time when a campaign for independence, were it united and were it driven and determined, wouldn't just give people a promise of jam tomorrow. We could be delivering jam today with A, competent government, and B, a real route map to independence. That's what's needed. And in Scotland, that will, if required, address the symptom and the problem that reform comprises. But in its absence, reform won't make great inroads here, but the people will not benefit from another 5 years of a Holyrood Parliament, which carries on with the nonsense of the last 10 years. That's abundantly clear. And I think if I could slightly touch on the reaction to the Supreme Court decision in that respect, I was just going to say that decision was very crystal clear. And yesterday, there were further announcements from the Human Rights Commission, etc., to the effect that biological sex is sex and a woman is an adult human female, etc. And even now, there are politicians refusing to accept that position. And we've got, for example, Maggie Chapman facing that vote in a couple of days' time. So there remain difficulties within Scotland that require to be addressed competently to give the ordinary man and woman in the street the confidence in knowing that Scotland can govern itself responsibly. And John Swinney needs to make those changes overnight and give people the hope that next year's election can create the better Scotland that we want to see. But the job's got to start today.
Yeah, actually, I've got to take exception with you to one thing you said. None of us thought that Labour would be as bad with it. I did. I actually warned everybody. I did. I remember saying to Carol Vorderman and Peter Stankovic, who were saying, "Oh, we've got to get the Tories out, get Sunak, get Sunak," and I kept saying, "And replace him with what and who?" Because it will be no different. And it's actually gone to the motion. Maybe I didn't think it'd be so extreme, and I should have said. I meant to say actually at the beginning when you were talking about the centre right, Lloyd. I look at Labour as extreme right, and the Tories as far right, and Nigel Farage as Z Kyle. That's, I mean, maybe it's because I'm a lefty, but something that was alluded to earlier there, I can't remember if it was Eva or I think it was Eva, Alan, was that, people have voted for reform because, they saw the Tories disappointed, they've seen Labour and think, oh God, who have we got? Who's riding to the rescue, reform? Well, people are like that, that's a fact. But in Scotland, there is someone that can ride to the rescue, Alan, and that's John Swinney. If he picks up the phone and starts making some calls and starts pulling everyone together, the independence movement can ride to the rescue of Scotland. That is an absolute given.
Yeah, I mean, reform are a parasite that feeds on the sewage coming from Westminster. They just take all the crap and just feed on it and build themselves up more and more and more. And you're right, independence would solve us of that problem. But there is things that we could do even with the devolved parliament. And that is by being a competent government. When you're competent, the right-wing lunatics do not have an argument. And even going back to COVID, we missed a brilliant opportunity. Simply because after Brexit, we lost so many nurses, care workers, plumbers, joiners, because they all got deported. They were Polish and from other countries. They got deported, so it left us very short-staffed. But during COVID, we had a year where schools were closed. What we should have done was take an opportunity to start those children who missed primary one by putting them into primary one at the age of 6 or 7. Then keep them on to school till they were 18. And then also change our education system where every child is not academic. That is just a basic fact. You would figure out which ones weren't academic by the time they were about 13, 14. You would then give those people a choice of going into technical education. So as they then learn skills, such as caring, such as plumbing, such as joinery. And we could then build up the skills that we have lost so many years ago, particularly under Thatcher. When we have those skills, we then have the people who can then build the homes, go into the NHS and build up the NHS, help people repair their plumbing, their joinery. We would have the skills ourselves, so we wouldn't have to rely on other people. And we would also be creating a lot of skilled jobs, taking people out of poverty. And when you take people out of poverty, again, the right wing do not have an argument. Because poverty is the thing that puts people into desperation. And when they're desperate, they will either go for the ones that promise them the earth, or they will just sink into themselves and not bother doing anything. Both are very dangerous. So we have got to get a competent government back in place in Holyrood. John Swinney has got to pick up the phone and phone those who know about the Yes movement. Not the political movement, because the political movement is not working. It is the Yes grassroots movement that will push this forward. We know how to do it. They should be getting in touch with us.
They should. The clock's beating us. There's a few things I want to get in before we finish this podcast. And one of them is this, I always like to make sure there's more and more reasons every week why we should get out of the union. But an absolute classic this week, and again, I wish Phil was here to give us his bit in this one. And it's this one, Lloyd. An experiment, to dim the sun has been given the green light by the UK government. 50 million quid. They talk about the money we waste in ferries and, you're wasting money on this. Now, in Scotland, we're getting so much sun. They want to dim it. They want to dim this. I mean, they want to get rid of what little vitamin D the people get. They're crazy. They're lunatics have taken over the asylum, Lloyd.
Yeah, of that there's no question. I actually saw a bit of the presentation of this concept where the scientists themselves started arguing and fighting with each other over how many people would die as a result of dimming the sun. And the argument they had was about if it was only 50,000 people, but over a 300-year period, you could guarantee that 150,000 people wouldn't die. Was that not a good enough trade-off? I could not believe what I was hearing. They were talking about the sacrifice of human beings for the sake of an experiment and then arguing about the numbers. One death, I'm sorry. That's just one too many. Thank you very much for your scientific experiment. I mean, all of this craziness comes from the still unsubstantiated so-called climate crisis that we're having, which seems to be talked about by swivel-eyed loons like Maggie Chapman and Patrick Harvey and barely anybody else. I just find it absolutely incredible that here we have, in the early part of the 21st century, human beings still believing that they have the ability to control and manipulate nature. We don't. It's a simple, straightforward fact. We don't have that ability. Don't bring us your nuclear. Don't dim the sun. Don't do any of this shit because it's not sensible. Anything that runs the risk of killing a person, right? Anything at all that runs the risk of killing a person for the sake of a kind of irrelevant scientific endeavor, don't do it. It's as simple as that. Just don't do it because we don't have the right. In some ways that triggers another thing in my mind. We've had the discussions of the assisted dying bill in Westminster. We're about to have the same discussion in the Scottish Parliament. Where are we at the moment when we're effectively talking about legislation either dimming the sun or, carbon footprint, or now we have assisted dying? Why are we allowing legislators who just a few months ago could not tell the difference between a man and a woman? Why are we allowing them the right to make decisions about life and death? In the end, if you stand for election to Parliament particularly, but at any level, what you're doing is you are putting yourself forward as someone who should be looking after the best interests of the public, right? We've now moved into a stage over the past 10 years where there are people who are going into politics who believe that they are perfectly within their rights to suggest that life or death should be decided by them and not by anybody else. With zealots about to embark on this assisted dying bill, which will, and I tell you now, it's going to go exactly the same way as the gender recognition nonsense. You're going to have people forcing through on emotional arguments scientifically flawed concepts. But hey, isn't that the whole story of the environment and dimming the sun? It's all about flawed science.
Yeah, well, they need to kill some more people because Starmer's latest squeeze, which was, of course, to send the British troops to Ukraine, apparently the Ministry of Defence did war games and said within 3 days Britain would virtually be wiped off the face of the earth. And I thought, well, that's maybe a bit extreme. So let's dim the sun, chaps. Kill a few that way. That looks like the way we're going. Time goes on. You started a wee bit on this, and I wanted to bring it in. And it was this about Maggie Chapman, who went against, she went against the Supreme Court, calling them bigots and everything was wrong. And she hasn't been removed yet, which I find bizarre. We've got to wait till Monday, Tuesday to see the vote. And we wonder if, it will be whipped through by different parties to keep her in situ. She should have been sacked. She should have been kicked out of Parliament. But, Eva, in a society where you can challenge law, where the biggest democracy in the world, the United States of America, is sanctioning the ICC and the ICJ, who have pointed out there's a genocide. If the British government can deny the legal fact and not arrest and don't arrest a war criminal like Netanyahu. And surely she can get away with saying that men can be women.
She can get away with saying whatever she wants if she's a member of the public. Perhaps she can get away with saying whatever she wants if she's an MSP, though I very much doubt it. Under no circumstances can she get away with making the comments that she made recently when she's the deputy chair of the Equalities Committee at the Parliament. So you'll have seen the letter, the absolutely fantastic work of art, blistering letter sent to Karen Adam as the convener of that committee and Maggie Chapman by the Faculty of Advocates, where they refer to the independence of the judiciary, how essential it is to have respect for the rule of law, and how justice has to be seen to be done. Now, that committee are going to have to consider the Scottish Government's reaction to the Supreme Court decision. Shouldn't take them very long, given the statement that was issued last night requiring them to accept biology, etc. But what cannot happen is that the people that give evidence to that committee and the people that rely on that committee come into objective decisions and providing responsible guidance and advice in future have to know that they've had a fair hearing. Under no circumstances can you ever expect that justice would be seen to be done if the deputy chair of that committee refers to bigotry, prejudice and hatred coming from the Supreme Court. That cannot be allowed. That woman cannot stay in that job. To be fair, if Lorna Slater and Patrick Harvey were politicians of standing, should have been hauled over the coals immediately, but perhaps more importantly, she should have known that she should never have been making the statements in the first place. They should have gone with grace and accepted that they've been wrong all these years, because the Supreme Court did not change the law. The Supreme Court confirmed what the law has always been. It's very important that former lawyers or amateur lawyers or barrack room lawyers accepted that to be the case. And some of them who were very vociferous and very vocal in name-calling people like us, saying that our views were not valid, have been signally incapable of attending Parliament since the decision was released, but they have been able to accept invitations to book festivals and pop along to the gym and take selfies. Now, I'm still waiting for that broom cupboard video apologising to the women and the men and the children of Scotland who understood all along that you cannot change your sex and that sex means biological sex. But what I really hope is that, in common with the Faculty of Advocates and the Law Society of Scotland, who said something similar, that our First Minister will make an unequivocal statement confirming that sex means biological sex, that he won't continue trying to fob it off by saying the Supreme Court has spoken and we will respect the opinion of the Supreme Court. He has to go much further to enable Scotland to heal from the wounds of division that he and his predecessors created, because he was right in there with the rest of them. You didn't see him or Keith Brown voting against any of that legislation. They were vociferous in their support for it. And most importantly, we have still to learn the amount that has been spent on legal expenses on this farce. It is likely that because the rule is expense follows success, that For Women Scotland will be awarded expenses against the Scottish Government. For Women Scotland had one donation from J.K. Rowling of about £70,000, I think. All their other funds were crowdfunded from the general public, from people giving a couple of quid to people giving a couple of £100, but they were not bankrolled by some, subterranean American right-wing fanaticist, as we see constantly being claimed. But it's the people of Scotland who will be paying the bill for the folly, and I say the word deliberately, folly, the madness, the insanity of John Swinney, Nicola Sturgeon, Keith Brown, Cowcab Stewart, Emma Roddick, all those people whose fingers and mitts were all over this legislation. Maggie Chapman, Lorna Slater, Alex Cole-Hamilton. We did it for you, Beth. Anas Sarwar, whipping his Labour members to support that legislation, and he now claims that he always supported women's single-sex protections. I mean, how's that for a forked tongue? So I think that the first step in the Scottish Parliament, when it is reconvened as the Parliament of an independent country, will be to say that madness, insanity and folly of this nature, leading to court actions that cost the public a lot of money unnecessarily when they were warned long ago, should lead to politicians being found personally liable to pay the legal expenses so incurred. Because the Scottish Government didn't just slightly lose this case by a toty wee margin, they were slaughtered. They were done out the park. The court wiped the floor with them. That's the reality. And they should be paying for it, not us.
Correct. Just a quick one before I come to you, Alan, but I saw this headline: the trans people are considering fleeing Britain and claiming asylum abroad. Well, yeah. Don't let the door hit your arse on the way out, boys and girls, but boys mainly. But this is the thing, Alan. If the UK government will not honour the highest land, the highest court in the world, should we be surprised that a minion in a devolved parliament won't accept the law of the United Kingdom?
Oh no, we shouldn't have, especially Maggie Chapman, the MSP that got elected on a handful of votes. But I wonder if this is connected to the last subject that you had with the dimming out with the sun, because one of the consequences of that is a seasonal affected disorder, which causes mental health problems. Maybe they don't think that enough of us had mental health problems to actually push this through. So they thought, we'll just do something to try and push it through this way by making everybody mad. But Maggie Chapman also said that it was unfair because the trans community didn't get the opportunity to be heard in the Supreme Court.
Lie.
Maggie, remember the Equalities Committee, where you refused to allow the women to put their say forward, where you had a woman physically removed for wearing a scarf. Don't talk to me about people not being allowed to be heard, because you are one of the worst people for that. But the other dangerous thing is, this woman is the rector of Dundee University. She is in a high-profile position of an organisation that educate our youth. She should be made to resign from that position as well. She's a dangerous individual, and we will be doing everything in our power to make sure she does not set foot in that parliament again after the next election.
Here, liberate Scotland. Just to say, she lied about that, calling witnesses. The Supreme Court doesn't call witnesses. The trans community could have put in a submission. They chose not to. I think they knew they were on it hiding, but they chose to. No one was excluded. It's a lie when you hear that, folks. A lie. The only way to change it and to appeal it is to change the law, and I don't think even the Labour Party are that bad. Someone's ended the recording. No, we're in there. Last thing before we end the recording here, Phil A. Lloyd. I'm getting all tongue-tied today, and I've needed a drink. Maybe that's why. But on this, you made it a few weeks ago, but this group, NECAP, an Irish group, have now had their visa removed from going to America. They've been banned in Germany because they're highlighting the genocide going on in Palestine. And it comes from their show in Coachella, where they spoke up against the genocide. But isn't it terrible in our present society when people telling the truth, pointing out a genocide, are banned from America, who's complaining to Europe about we stop freedom of speech, and they talk about all that freedom of speech. It's hypocrisy.
Oh, it's total hypocrisy. But what I love about these lads is they play the system so brilliantly. They play it absolutely fantastically. What they've got from this is they've got more publicity for what they did, more publicity for the cause of the Palestinians than they could possibly have had in any other way. And it wasn't accidental. These laddies are very, very smart. These are the ones who, when they were handing out grants from the Arts Council in Northern Ireland for traditional music, and I'll tell you something about that in a minute. Right, these laddies put in for the money, they got refused the money, so they then took the government to court. They won their case out the ballpark, and then took the money and divided it in half, gave half to a youth project in a loyalist area and gave the other half to a youth project in a Republican area. And they did all that because they knew that what they were doing was right, but more importantly, it allowed them to expose the hypocrisy of the so-called equanimity between the communities in Northern Ireland in terms of arts funding, right? Outside of that, here's something I didn't know until a good friend of mine was asked to write a book about these laddies. 2 of them have got degrees in medieval literature, primarily as a result of them learning the old Irish Gaelic songs from the 11th, 12th and the 13th century. These are not stupid boys. These are not wee Neds like they've been treated in the British press. These are very, very cute political operators. And I would say this, they're a direct product of the society they grew up in, a society that sees Britain for what it is, it sees imperialism for what it is, and it sees genocide when it's genocide.
Here, here. Here, here, absolutely. I'm with them the whole way. Just a quick reminder, folks, next Saturday, we'll be in Glasgow. We'll be at the Glasgow Green. Look for the Through a Scottish Prism gazebo there and the Indie for Indie gazebo. And we'll be delighted to see you. And I hope lots of you turn out because we really need to start, you know, telling them we've not gone away. We're just waiting for that torch to be lit and hopefully Liberate Scotland are going to be the very people who will light that torch. Until we see you and yours, take care.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.